I'm Maya Parson for the Human Nature Forum. I'm here today talking with a special guest, Professor Agustin Fuentes from Princeton University, Professor of Anthropology. Thank you for being here today, Dr. Fuentes.
My pleasure to be here. Glad to chat.
Great. Dr. Fuentes is the author of many books, several of which are about human nature. So I thought we would begin today by talking about your book, Race, Monogamy, and Other Lies They Told You, Busting Myths About Human Nature. What are those myths and why do they need busting? What motivated you to write this book?
Yeah, I think in that particular context, I was thinking with myths about what sex means for humans and writ large, what aggression means and is for humans, and especially what race means and is for humans. And there are these pernicious myths about what is natural for humans, that there is a one way to be a human. And I argue that there are actually many successful ways to be human and that the biology and human evolutionary history support that. So basically the myth of sex being, male, female as binary opposites and two distinct kinds of being, that's incorrect. It's a little bit more complicated than that. The of a human nature, that humans are divided up into biological groups we call races: Black, white, African, European, Asian, however you break that up. I bust that because that's not supported by any biological evolutionary data. But racism is extremely important, right? So we try to think about, why do people think some of these myths? And the myth of race actually comes from racism, not vice versa. And finally, aggression, this notion that humans are naturally, or at least male humans, are naturally aggressive and violent, that's our adaptive zone. That's what is human nature at the core, a kind of Jekyll and Hyde reality. And that's also not true. It's much more complicated. And so I guess the punchline is, many of these myths about what human nature is are based on cultural, historical, or structural beliefs that are incorrect, and providing access to the biology, the sort of anthropology, the history illustrates how these myths are incorrect and how we can better think about them and reconstruct new ways of thinking about what it means to be human.
So if we are busting those myths, and then we want to move in a more, maybe, I don't want to say productive direction, but a more constructive direction, perhaps.
Yeah.
What truths are there about human nature, or are there truths about human nature? What insights do you have from your discipline or from other disciplines?
Yeah, so I work across sort of anthropology, cultural and biological anthropology, human evolutionary histories, psychology, history, and drawing on a variety of things, and of course philosophical orientations to these things. I really come down pretty much on the notion that there is no human nature, but rather there are human natures, right? There are many successful ways to be human, and that comes from thinking about biological variation, that is variation amongst bodies, variation amongst cultures, variation amongst ways to sort of be in the world. And one thing humans do more interestingly than almost any other species on the planet is have like social and developmental and biological plasticity and variability. And there are many ways in which it works, right, for different humans. Everyone knows this. Just look at your friends and family, or the people you walk around and see during the day. There's a lot of variation out there in humans, and understanding what this variation looks like globally for all 8 billion of us, and what it looks like over time, helps us recognize that there are many successful ways to be human. And so there's not just one sort of right human nature. Rather, there's a bunch of patterns and commonalities that all humans share, but there's different ways to tweak them and sort of experience them and live them out. So the constructive, or I don't even mind productive, way to think about that is, what do we know about human biological variation? What do we know about human cultural variation? What do we know about the different successful ways to do the human thing in the world? And if we know a little bit more about that, then our own personal lives and our relations with others can be improved.
In your work, you talk a lot about transdisciplinarity and the importance of this concept when thinking about human nature. And I'm wondering if you can explain to viewers what transdisciplinarity is and why it matters.
Yeah, most people are common with the term multidiscipline, right?
Mhm.
Or interdisciplinary, which basically means you get people from different disciplines: biology, anthropology, psychology, chemistry, philosophy. Get them together, and each one in an interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary approach sort of gives their knowledge, right? Gives what they have from their specific discipline. And
Mm,
then they all sort of mess around with that and try to think of things. That's important. That's really good. Transdisciplinary is when all of these different disciplines come to the table to sort of interact with one another, but each one comes not only with their own set of expertise, but a willingness to be intellectually generous, to be open to other knowledges, other expertises, shaking their foundations a little bit, to be ready to change the way you do stuff. And so, for example, over the years, I've worked with philosophers, theologians, biologists, psychologists, to think about human natures, right? To think about how do we ask the better questions here. And I'll tell you, many of my assumptions, the things I came to the table thinking, oh, this is right, it's not. It's a little bit more complicated, or hearing someone else shifted the way I see or think about a particular set of data or a particular question or problem. So transdisciplinary is more risky, but it's actually a better way to come to the table. It's really difficult, right? Because everyone has to come to the table saying, I'm an expert, but maybe I don't know it all, and maybe this might shift the way I think about even my own area of expertise.
mhm, mhm. Um, I guess jumping off that, my final question for you is just what is next for you when you are thinking about human nature? What questions are you asking, building on this transdisciplinary richness that you have uncovered or enmeshed yourself in?
Yeah,
Where's your
I mean,
attention turning now?
so I mean, there's a bunch of places. I'm actually just coming up with my next book project, which is in fact about human natures, sort
Hmm.
of a short book to help people jump onto this conversation in a frame that I think is really beneficial, right? Productive, as you said, or
Hmm.
constructive. The idea that, hey, we need to know some biology, we need to know some cultural realities, anthropology, histories, some philosophy, maybe even some theology, to sort of put these things in dialogue. And how can we look around the world and across different cultures and different experiences and different times of
Hmm.
human evolution and get a little bit more insight and ask more interesting questions about what it means to be human. So that's one area. But my ongoing work really focuses on sort of what can we know about human bodies, sort of a biology now, in the past, and potentially in the future, and how that relates with our cultural, right? So this biocultural landscapes, how it relates with the sort of broader understandings of sort of, let's say, gender and sex, or our relationships to artificial intelligence. What
Hmm.
are these challenges knowing about human bodies, their dynamics, their variation, their plasticity, their constraints? What can we understand if we put bodies in relation with different things? AI is a good example, right? Artificial intelligence. Like, what are the good questions to be asking? Not so much, should we be worried about AI taking over the world? I'm not worried about that, but I am really interested in the interfaces. What happens with increasing um, reliance on artificial intelligence with humans' cognitive processes, right? Or, we know that humans drive a car very bioculturally. We don't, everyone thinks they might drive well or logically. They don't. They're actually influenced by all these kinds of things. Cars can never do that. Oops, sorry. Cars can never drive like a human. So, what does it mean to think about self driving cars in the big context of how humans drive and what we do and how we've designed our driving landscapes? Does that make sense? I'm rambling a little here, but
Absolutely. Both of those things sound absolutely fascinating. I'm wondering if you have a name for the book yet. And okay, so we just need to
yeah,
stay
it's
tuned.
just that. So it's going to be something about human natures, right? A lot of
Okay.
people is like, oh, don't put the S on it. It's confounding. But my point is, look, there are many successful ways to be human. The title might
Mhm.
look something like
Okay.
that.
Hmm.
If we understand what that means about bodies, about cultures, about psychologies, about philosophies, and about histories, the fact that there are many ways to be successfully human, then we have a better set of questions and a better conversation. Let's do that rather than thinking there's one way that's a right way and a wrong way. Let's figure out what the possibilities, what the affordances and constraints are of this whole human experience, and maybe hope that that kind of questioning, that kind of understanding puts us in a place to have a little bit better future than the present we're seeing right now.
Hmm. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. That sounds fascinating. I can't wait to get my hands on a copy. And
I can't
thank you
wait to
so much
write
for
it.
joining us today. Um, viewers, I hope that you will come back again soon and stay tuned for more Talking Human Nature. Thank you, Dr. Fuentes, and we will look forward for your new book. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Me
Thank
too.
you.
Bye bye.
Bye-bye.